Here is a world of communication, bringing together all people in a new era of understanding.
Elektrischer Reporter.
Google, liebe Zuschauer daheim an den Empfangsgeräten oder von wo auch immer Sie uns gerade zusehen. Google ist die Internetsuchmaschine der Firma Google Inc. mit Sitz in Mountain View, Klammer auf, USA, Klammer zu, erklärt emotionslos die freie Online-Enzyklopädie Wikipedia. Googelt man hingegen mit dem Suchstring Google ist bei Google nach Google, erhält man eine Trefferliste mit wesentlich farbenprächtigeren Definitionen. Hier ein paar Beispiele. Google ist beliebtester Arbeitgeber der USA, der viertgrößte Serverhersteller der Welt, Europas Website Nummer 1, ein Monopolist. Google ist dein Freund, das Netz, vielleicht auch Gott, die einflussreichste Marke der Welt, ein Basar. Google ist datensüchtig, intelligent, eine Heuschrecke, viel zu mächtig. Google ist käuflich, gefährlich, lustig, böse. Alles klar? Jüngst hatte ich kurz Gelegenheit, mich mit Google-Vizepräsidentin Marissa zu unterhalten. Schauen wir uns das doch einfach mal an. Vielleicht sind wir danach ja klüger.
Well, I think one thing that became clear to us is when you look at the usage of the YouTube site itself, but also of video all over the web, more and more what you see is when you see a video on a website, it's a YouTube player hosted on that website. And so we really looked at YouTube and said, you know, this is YouTube, the site is phenomenal. What they've really built is a platform where almost all video that plays on the web is a YouTube hosted video. So for example, Google, the logic then for us is to say, well, if we want to do advertising in video format and we want to have a place to place those ads, YouTube is obviously a company that we're either going to have to do a deal with or we would have to acquire in order to do that experimentation. So our hope is generally to provide high quality video ads online, and we think that the YouTube platform that they've built all across the web represents a phenomenal opportunity to do that. Well, I think there's a couple of important things to remember. So while we would like to have more services that are subscription-based and also some product-based sales like our Google Search Appliance, and we have a few small thriving businesses in this way, the advertising revenue itself that comprises 90% of the revenue that Google generates is in fact very diverse. So it comes from a lot of different industries. It's very diverse, from small businesses, large businesses, and all over the world. And so while typically the reason people would be concerned about 99% of revenue coming from one source is because it would be vulnerable to, say, a downshift. But when you look at how diverse the different forms of revenue are for Google, it's something that, while we think about it, we're less concerned about it because it's hard to imagine such a global downswing that would affect all of those industries simultaneously. Well, I think that we do have a strategy. We think a lot about what our strategy should be. That said, we also don't like to stifle creativity. So when we have engineers who have compelling ideas that they've managed to develop into a demonstration, that is something that we're eager to launch on Google Labs or launch in a beta form. So we're willing to give it a try. That said, a lot of the products that we develop come from very strategic positions. So for example, with Google Maps, we realized that there was one, a big need for better mapping online, but two, we saw that a lot of people were ending up using our competitors because Google didn't offer maps. So that was a product that we chose to develop from a very strategic point of view. Well, we don't talk about future products, and I don't like to ever say never. That's not something that's in the plans for us right now. We think a lot about how search can augment an operating system in the form of something like Google Desktop. And I think that some of the functionality that Google Desktop provides to people on their computer is really important and phenomenal, and something that ultimately may be considered part of an OS. It's not something, we're not developing the whole OS ourselves. We just think about how search could help make an operating system work better for people.
Google produziert fast jeden Tag neue Dienste. die alle umsonst sind, die alle werbefinanziert sind, ob das jetzt Orkut ist oder ob ich meine Börsenkurse irgendwie, meine Wertpapiere bei Google Finance mache oder ob ich meine Einkäufe erstmal abchecke über Frugal oder ob ich irgendwie bei Gmail meine E-Mail mache und so weiter. Und wenn man jetzt mal diese einzelnen Bausteine verbindet, nämlich es gibt ein verbindendes Stück und zwar den Google-Account. Wenn du einen Google-Account hast, da laufen die ganzen Fäden zusammen. Und wenn du alle diese Dinge, wenn du da jeden von diesen Diensten und bei Google Maps deine Reisen und deine Bewegungen sozusagen planst und wenn du in Google Earth deine Placemarks machst, wo es dir gefällt und wo du irgendwie nach links und wo du nach rechts geguckt hast und wo du dich im Hotel einquartiert hast. Und wenn du das alles zusammenführst zu einem Profil, dann ist das was, wo jeder, also wo sogar Geheimdienstler irgendwie wahrscheinlich das Wasser im Munde zusammenläuft. Und wo man sagen muss, es kann einfach sein, dass das eine stille Reserve für schlechte Zeiten ist.
We aren't generating profiles. We think that our trust with our users is incredibly important. People use Google and they trust us with their searches and they trust us with their information because they think that we're trustworthy. And it's very important for us to value that trust and put in place very solid practices that protect user privacy. And that's something that we think a lot about. And so we have our privacy policy in place that talks about exactly how we will and won't use personal information. That's right. We don't cross-correlate information across services, and that's governed by our privacy policy.
My most pessimistic view is that Google becomes the next Microsoft, that everyone moves all their allegiances and control from Microsoft to Google, and we suffer the same situation we did with a monopoly. You know, Microsoft was convicted twice of being a monopolist, and I think this will happen to Google as well.
Well, I think it's important to concentrate on the fact that Google is a user-generated phenomenon, right? The fact that we have as many searches as we have is because users have chosen to use Google, and they've chosen to provide a lot of information to Google in the form of web pages and their email and so on and so forth. And it's really very user-driven. Usually in a monopoly type situation, there's something that's a little bit more controlled or confined as opposed to people just choosing the best product. So we personally think that our goal should be to focus on those end user needs and fill those really well, behave in a very ethical manner in the way that we conduct ourselves in business and with regard to our users, and that ultimately the user should choose what services they select and how their data is used. I think that there are some places where the two product lines overlap, but our goals are very different. So when you look at, say, for example, Google Docs or Google Spreadsheets, we think it's very important for people to have a way of easily maintaining and collaborating on documents online. And while there might be some similarities, in fact, that they're both documents or both spreadsheets, if you look at the type of functionality that the Google products provide, it's really a lot more about collaboration, easy editing, easy publishing. And our interest in that is that we think if it's easy for people to publish information, they'll bring more information to the web. And when they bring in more information to the web, there's more content that we can index. And that ultimately helps us bring much better search results to end users. So that's the goal. We think that by providing tools like docs and spreadsheets, we can ultimately provide better search. And that's the emphasis. Well, we certainly have some people at Google who are very interested in artificial intelligence and what can be done with a vast array of computers. And if we really can get all the human knowledge online and searchable, there's some pretty phenomenal things that you can do. That said, every person, even with my background in artificial intelligence, we all have different opinions on what's possible and is that really intelligence per se. But I do think we're going to have some very smart computers that do some pretty amazing things in the future. I think that we have a few applications that attempt to learn in the abstract, and now they have very formal applications. So for example, the Google Spell Checker tried to understand, like, could it learn how to spell words better, and use some very sophisticated artificial intelligence algorithms to try and provide that "did you mean" feature that appears on the top of the page. And it did a really phenomenal job learning how to spell. But it's not true intelligence. It really looks at patterns of people typing queries and how they correct it, and occurrences of words on web pages, and so on and so forth. And the other, again, the sort of general AI research at Google, the other artifact that's spun out of it is the way that we contextually target AdSense. So the AdSense ads that you sometimes see appearing alongside of content on the web uses a very sophisticated algorithm that takes the text on the page and tries to understand on a meta level, what is the page about? And so that, there's a basic AI research happening at Google that ultimately provided a technology that became really good at contextually targeted advertising. So now I would say, are we still doing general AI research? Yes. Are we also putting a lot more resource and funding into the spell checker and into AdSense targeting? Absolutely. So in particular, we're investing heavily in those two pieces of artificial intelligence application. And then we're also looking at the broader research question. Censorship is always a sensitive issue, and there's generally two philosophies. There's one of engagement and there's one of estrangement. Do you choose to not enter a market in the hopes of affecting change, or do you enter the market in the hopes of affecting change? And in China, we felt it was important to provide Google services to Chinese users. And if we were going to conduct business in China, we obviously have to comply with local laws and local requests. But I should note that that isn't unique to China. That's true of all countries all over the world. We have to comply with local law. And so while we generally try and censor our results as little as possible, we do need to censor them as required by the local governments.
Zu Zeiten der Sowjetunion gab es unter westlichen Journalisten den Berufsstand der sogenannten Kremologen. Das waren Kollegen, die aus den kleinsten Andeutungen der Sowjetführer, aus den leisesten Zwischentönen und vor allem aus dem, was nicht gesagt wurde, weitreichende Schlüsse ziehen konnten. Zeitgenossen, die sich gerne als Googlologen versuchen möchten, finden unter elektrischerreporter.de einen Link auf ein vollständiges Transkript des Interviews. Und jetzt mal ganz ohne Überleitung, was ist eigentlich Web 2.0?
Web 2.0 ist, wenn du deinen Blog umdekorierst, anstatt deine Wohnung zu tapezieren.
Vielen Dank. Liebe Zuschauer, das war es auch schon wieder für heute. Ich verabschiede mich und wünsche Ihnen eine inspirierte Woche. Bleiben Sie uns gewogen und schalten Sie auch das nächste Mal wieder ein. Bis dahin bleibe ich Ihr elektrischer Reporter.
Visit us often and enjoy our screen attractions in the comfort of your own car. You'll be glad to know that we provide bottle warming service at refreshment stand.
Handelsblatt. Substanz entscheidet.
Die Empfänglichkeit für die feinsten Triebe der Zukunft in der Gegenwart, das ist, was utopische Sehnsucht ausmacht. In einem Klotz das Versprechen entdecken, in einem Ding die Seele. Das Ungenügen des Nicht-Entfalteten in allem Empfinden heißt unbehaust unterwegs sein.
Lesen Sie das Handelsblatt 4 Wochen zum Vorzugspreis und sparen Sie über 30%. Jetzt bestellen auf handelsblatt.com.